Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chris Macpherson Show. We've made it to episode 007, and now if I was a little more cultured, would be the time I'd reference a James Bond film and make a nice little pun out of it, but I don't have that about me. But we do have one thing on this show, and it is a good host of guests. And we're going to have a debutant on the show today. We're looking forward to that. We'll have some returning favourites as well. We're going to talk motorsport. We're going to dig into the round ball as we have quite a bit already. And, of course, talk about that dismal first test as well as a little bit more cricket. But let's get things moving on four wheels. Let's welcome in our man on the ones and twos. He's our producer behind the scenes as well as our motorsport guru, JR. Welcome back on episode 007.
Thanks, Chris. No trash hotel rooms after Vegas, but a lot of fun watching that race on the weekend.
It certainly was lively. There was plenty to talk about, but obviously the headline act is King Max. He's back at it. He's won again. A deserving winner. Lots of things didn't necessarily go his way throughout the whole season as it looked like it might early in the year, but he's taken that title again.
He certainly has, Chris. And the biggest thing for him is he's now the only the second driver to win 4 in a row, which makes 2 Red Bull drivers to hold that record, as Sebastian Vettel was the previous holder of that.
It's pretty crazy to think when you think about some of the royalty that's come before that no one had done it before Vettel. Now Verstappen's managed to equal that in the Red Bull, and even the legacy of some of those great cars previously as well that no one's done it. So a huge honour, and it's it's what next for Max, I guess.
Yeah, look, next is probably trying to defend another championship in not the fastest car. He did have a very fun exchange with Zach Brown, like just saying, yes, I've done it in a car that's not the fastest at the moment, because the McLaren is clearly still the faster car. Although Mercedes, George Russell just sat out the front the entire day. Lewis slotting into second place behind him after finishing down in 10th, starting down in 10th, I should say. So big moves next year, I think. Like, we're going to have a much tighter competition, particularly in those first few rounds.
I was going to say, it looks like the way it's shaping that it's going to be a much more competitive grid as a whole, and certainly in some of those top teams. And speaking of some of the top teams, all is not as happy as it might be at Red Bull at the moment in terms of as they look forward with that championship now for the driver. Ferrari having a few dramas.
Look, Ferrari has had a few things going on, one of which is just the radio exchanges between Charles Leclerc and the team. I won't show the X-rated one that happened not long after this message, but Carlos was told not to put Charles under any pressure. Charles Leclerc was overtaken a few moments later. And at the end of the race was just absolute down in the dumps, like couldn't believe what had happened around him. Carlos Sainz is a driver who doesn't give a shit right now. Like he's done with the team. He's going to Williams in a couple of weeks. So he's just there to just keep going with the Carlos Sainz brand.
I was going to say, he hasn't got a lot to lose from a Ferrari point of view, and it's not like Williams are going to be too worried about him playing as a team player because they're going to have a lot of chips in that basket next year. But there's obviously a question mark now. Leclerc will have a very dominant driver alongside him next year, so he's going to have to learn to, accept being second fiddle at certainly points, if not most of the season.
Yeah, I do not think Charles Leclerc is ready for Lewis Hamilton as a teammate. Well, Lewis has shown that he's still a good driver, so going into a Ferrari that's very competitive right now as well, I think Charles Leclerc is in some trouble next year.
Well, it's going to be interesting to watch. Certainly lots to wash out as we get through the final couple of races in the year. But the F1 circus continues on. We know we've got a little bit happening still.
Yeah, so there was some breaking news today. I know with you being tied up with some A-League related content today that you aren't aware of what's happened. Formula One announced today, in principle, that General Motors Cadillac will join as an 11th team in the 2026 season. Notably, Andretti's name is not on this announcement.
That's huge when you think about it. One, that we're giving a team essentially a 15-month runway, which isn't a lot in terms of Formula One to get themselves up to speed. 2, that is General Motors coming in. But 3, that Andretti, it was almost written that if there was going to be that expansion of the grid, that Andretti was pushing hard and going to be there. So that's a lot to comprehend.
Yeah, so there's a couple of caveats there. One is that they're going to be using Ferrari engines for at least their first 2 seasons. So they'll come in with an engine supplier in place. The other thing that I haven't got fully confirmed reports of this, they're using Andretti facilities. So all that back end that they'd done previously is already in place. So that's why we're seeing this very quick turnaround in terms of team going in. I believe, based on some of the media reports, that the Andretti name itself was one of the reasons why that bid was like not taken up with, where they had sort of claimed that they weren't ready for 25 and certainly weren't ready for 26. Andretti had always said he was never coming in 25. It's always been 26 when the new regs come in. So it'll be interesting to watch the space as to who the team principal is. Obviously, the drivers' market heats up immediately with this announcement. There's 2 more spots up for grabs. Will we see some US drivers such as Colton, or are we going to see the return of some fan favourites?
I was going to say, there's certainly a few marketable names, if not, decent drivers as well. We talked about the honorary Aussie and the Aussie last week. You'd have to think from a marketing point of view, they might be on a US shopping list.
Look, there's some high potential there. I won't mention those names there. But any US driver now has like a very great, like there's going to be a program there for US drivers. Like this is a big deal for the sport. Having 2 more drivers like slots available just makes the season like next year, particularly the silly season, get that much more interesting.
Certainly does. It's really pushing that US focus into F1. We know that's been a priority for the FIA and everyone running the sport because at the end of the day, there's quite a bit of money in the US motorsports. They've increased the races over there now to bring in a US team. It'll be an interesting space to watch, and as you said, it just is going to heat up that game of musical chairs we like to watch with the drivers. Is going to have some blowtorches under a few seats.
Absolutely, it will. Like it's just going to be riveting viewing.
Certainly is. Well, we continue to watch the F1 circus as it rolls out, but that will wrap us for this week in terms of the motorsport. We might take a bit of a break, let JR get back behind the 1s and 2s, and then expand our sporting horizons in the next segment. Well, we'll move on from motorsport to the red ball action, the cricket. It hasn't been the best for the Australians, but we feel we need to dissect it despite the diabolical showings in Perth from our test side. India picked them apart, led by their captain, Jasprit Bumrah, and a man who always likes to lead the attack. He's the host of the Third Man Up podcast. He's Jake Paul's arch enemy. He is Brody Burrows. Brody, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again, Chris, and hit the nail on the head with the Jake Paul, I think, mate.
Yeah, well, we know it's still a sore point, but we won't dig into that, otherwise we won't get out of here tonight. The other man that is joining us, and he's going to cover off cricket and soccer, he's across the airwaves and your screens with Paramount Plus and Channel 10 and Fox Sports. Ben Homer, a man of many talents. You've been covering the WBBL. You're a cricket aficionado, so we thought you'd get you in here as well.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, Brody. How are you both?
Hey, good, mate.
Going well. Well, let's start it off. The first test, it was diabolical to say the least. We thought we had a bit of a show when we bowled out the Indians for 150, but in stepped Jasprit Bumrah, picked apart our top order. Nathan McSweeney, a lamb to the slaughter. And then the Indian batters did what they did. They batted time. They got plenty of runs. And they set us a monstrous task, which we couldn't reel in. Brody, looking at it, pull it apart for me. Find a silver lining if you can.
Yeah, at the moment, there's not much of a silver lining at all. But I think if there's one thing we can all look at is there's only one way to go from here, and that's up. So it doesn't get much worse than this. And I think Gerard Whateley said it best at the end of day 3. It's one of Australia's worst ever days of Test cricket, especially on home soil. And look, I think full credit has to go to India here. I mean, let's not forget 2 weeks ago they were getting called a basket case and they're going to come to Australia and be completely swept. And this is a completely different Indian side than the one that lost to New Zealand in India. So first of all, I think we just got to talk about Jasprit Bumrah. I mean, what a performance. And there's a lot of talk coming in, and that Perth pitch absolutely suited him to a T. We often talk about the Perth pitch suiting our Australian bowlers, and I mean, when you've got probably the best bowler in the last 5 years steaming in like that, unplayable deliveries. Poor Nathan McSweeney. What a debut coming up against probably the best fast bowler that we'll see for a long time, I think, especially in Australian conditions. But yeah, well done to India. I think this is the best thing for the series itself. India getting off to a hot start, pressure coming back on the Australian side. There's talk about dropping players. I think we just got to get through to this next test, finish that off, and then see where we are from there.
And Ben, I think Brody said it well there. We've been very focused on how bad Australia have been, but do we need to give some credit here to how good India were? Obviously, Bumrah with the ball, Jaiswal and Kohli with the bat. There's quite a few pieces here to take positives from.
Yeah, Boomer, obviously, yeah, as Brody said, what an outstanding play. There's an argument. I think the fact that he's only played, 41 tests, the argument around, where does he rank in the great bowlers of all time? It's a tough one based on that longevity, but let's say he plays another 20, 30 more. I think he's right in the question. You look at his average. I was just having a look at best averages in Test cricket. He's got the lowest average for 41 matches played. Everyone with a lower average than that has played less than 41 matches. A lot of them have only played around 20, 30. So that gives you an indication as to how impressive he is as a bowler. In terms of Kohli, I thought, yes, great century, but India were all over Australia by that point. So it wasn't quite the pressurised situation that maybe, it could have been. Maybe it wasn't as great a century as it could have been in sort of a really pressure situation. I thought Jaiswal's, in that moment was, for mine, more impressive. And also the way that Australia sort of let him get to the century there with Marnus bowling there. That was a little bit concerning, but that probably takes us on a different tangent. Just on the Aussies, big concerns. I've got massive concerns around them just because there's so many players out of form. Khawaja, Labuschagne, Smith. Head's obviously playing well. Carey is as well. Mitch Marsh is up and down, but that's my big concern. It's not just one player out of form. It's a number of them. And obviously McSweeney's inexperienced as well. So your top four are struggling at this point. I know Smith batted better in the second innings. He got a good ball from Siraj, but yeah, I'm concerned. And if Marnus doesn't bat well in Adelaide, well, I think they've got to replace him. Like, you look at he's made single-digit scores as far as the eye can see in his last something like 10 innings outside of one score of 90. So I think that basically they're going to need to give him a rest. And the way that I'd play it, I'd love to get both your thoughts on it, is Khawaja and McSweeney would open. You'd play, you'd put Smith in at 3, Head would move up to 4, Marsh at 5, and you'd bring Josh Inglis in at 6 with Carey at 7. That's how I would structure things, because Inglis has been batting well in Shield, so I think he's well, you've got to give him a chance, don't you?
I think the interesting thing is, and I don't mind what you've done there, there's talk that McSweeney becomes the next Cal Ferguson. I think that's probably a bit rough. There was talk around the fact that, as it was, and I can see you shaking your head, Broads, I'll get to you in a moment. He did face, Bumrah in fading light. When he came in, they weren't ideal pieces, but the Indian batters seemed to deal okay with the fading light and the fast bowlers. And let's be honest, the Australian fast bowlers aren't mugs, except, maybe that bloke bowling mediums who thinks he's a fast bowler. Hey, hats off to him. He rolled into 135 clicks, which is better than most of us could do. But I don't know. I'm not saying that that's the answer, because I don't know what we've got that's better. And I know there's people out there saying, bring in Renshaw or bring in Harris or bring in Bancroft, but they're not exactly lighting things up in the Shield at the moment. So I don't know that we've got a better answer. And the other thing I want to put to people is India are picking from a population, if we call it 50%, of 700 million males. We're picking from a population of 12.5 million males. You start to do the numbers and whittle it down, but you could, get a bit more accurate with that in terms of, eligible age brackets. But the sheer number of players that they have to pick from suggests, and as we saw, 2 of their best batters were out of action in this test, that they should have a stronger team. I know there's rings and all those other things. It comes into, lots of different pieces, but it's a very different situation for us. How does that shape up and how does that shape into it? Broads, fire away, mate.
Yeah, I think on that one, you said it well. It's like a religion. You go to India and there's cricket's being played in alleyways. There's been, you saw the story of Jaiswal. Like, it was absolutely amazing story of, he was selling pani puri on the streets you could barely call it a home, really. No power, no nothing, and just grinded away. And look where he is now. Over there, cricket it's a religion, and you can see their supporters when they do come into these matches. They are absolutely, they're not sitting at the back of the SACA members, maybe watching 5 or 6 balls for a day, like half the people there probably will be for the day-night test. They're there watching every single ball, and that's what I love about this test and this series is the Indian fans, the Indian cricket team, they speak so highly. And for them, I mean, there's that natural rivalry with Pakistan, but for them, they just grow another leg when they come to Australia. And similar to what Ben said before, just about Virat Kohli and his century. I thought that was horrible, horrible tactics. If there's one thing you do not want in this series is Kohli getting his tail up. You could see Kohli in the second innings when Australia was batting was so much more vocal, was so much more intense than what he was in the field in that first innings, especially after he dropped that catch. So I think, there's a few things to take away there.
There's certainly lots to take away. Ben talked about Marnus essentially having one more chance by the sounds of your game plan here, Ben. Does Australia make any changes for the second test? And if so, what does that look like? The other piece is, if you're India, their captain and their opening batter both likely to come back, what does that do for their lineup?
Well, I'm going to say the Indian lineup's pretty easy fix. I think you'd obviously Sharma. So this is what I'd do. You'd bring Gill would come in at 3, Patekal goes out, and then Rahul goes back into the middle order, and you bring Sharma in to open, and Duval drops out. So I think that would be fairly simple. And then obviously what they do with their spinners, Sundar, whether he plays, or Jadeja, Ashwin, and then what they do with their bowlers, I don't think there'd be too many changes. I know Shami's sort of potential, but wait and see how that plays out. So I think theirs is pretty simple. For Australia, I think you've got to go with the same side. First test, you've got to say, okay, well, give the players that didn't play well in the first test a chance to fix it. But we'll wait and see. And I've just got a left field thought on this. And I always think in life, generally, this might get a bit philosophical, but you need a balance. A balance is crucial. And I think, remember Sandpaper Gate, what happened in that period was we had the attack dogs, and we had that real arrogance, the mongrel. There was too much of it, in my opinion, at that point. I feel like we've gone too far the other way. I think you need a balance. You need like a player like a David Warner that's right in the face of the opposition, stirs things up a little bit, but doesn't overstep the mark like we did in that Sandpaper series against South Africa. And then you also need the calm characters like your Pat Cummins that can just keep a lid on things. And I just think at the moment we just lack that bit of extra edge. And I think that's, that's a big hole that David Warner's obviously left. We know what a great batsman he still is, obviously playing in the BBL this season, but I think that energy that he brings in the field and that aggression is a big loss for Australia.
Brody, on that note, who could be the person to fill that void? Have we got anyone in Sheffield Shield that jumps out to you?
Look, Travis Head, after about 6 beers, if he puts on those speed dealers, could be a decent choice, I think. But I think it's a tricky one, and I fully agree with Ben's comments. I've actually been thinking about that, so much throughout the day, and I actually thought their bowlers they were fantastic. I mean, look at Rana. He bowled a really heavy ball, and we saw him just working over the batters. And Siraj, I just love the way he steams in, and he can hit a pad, and he does the Stuart Broad. It's missing the leg stump. He'll think it's out, and he'll just keep charging down the wicket. But I just love those characters. They're in your face, and the time he's finished his follow through, he's about a foot away from the batter facing up. And I mean, you heard Mitch Stark sort of, joking around, laughing. I want to get Mitch Stark back to the Mitch Stark that was in your face, like he is against England, because he seems like a different character the way he bowls, and I think more so his mentality to India than what he is up against England. He gets really up and about. I think he's someone who could really, really ruffle a few feathers for me. I mean, Travis Head, I don't know if he has a bad bone in his body being the vice captain, and I mean, Marnus, it's just annoying. You couldn't really ask him. Khawaja is the same, doesn't have a bad bone in his body. And I don't know who could be the next one coming through, who could be that, whether it's a verbal enforcer, I suppose you'd call it, like a Davey Warner, who doesn't care.
Matt Wade was always the go-to, wasn't he?
Even wicket. Yeah. Like if you look back through Matt Wade, Brad Haddon, these guys are absolute pests. You've only got to listen to the Willow Talk podcast that Brad Haddon still trying to chime it in. Alyssa Healy does it in the women's game. we don't have those. Alex Carey is the nicest human alive. Like, doesn't seem to have a bad word. You look on the other side and people say, oh, Rishabh Pant's, quite, jovial, etc. But they've got killers in their team. They've got Virat. They've got Jasprit Bumrah. They've got these sorts of guys who aren't going to be your friend out there. So I just don't know. Maybe we need Dave Warner and Brad Haddon to start a bit of a mongrel school and just build a bit of an academy, and we just pick one or two. We can't, we've got to have like a quota rule around how many we can have in the team and get that balance sorted out. But maybe we can waylay the Davies brothers or something as our future. Just but all just they're aggro in the field. They're bouncing around. They're pretty energetic. They might be the ones to go through the academy there with Bull Benny.
Well,
someone lock Sam Constas away and don't feed him for a couple of weeks.
I don't. You know how we get to this point where, like, you get former players coming out and saying, "Oh, the team's too nice. It's not like it was in my day." All this kind of. And I think I think just saying that is just an easy analysis, and I just think it's too simple. And that's why you're probably going, "Oh, well, aren't you saying that?" No, I think I'm not saying they're too nice. I'm just saying when you're out there, a little bit of controlled aggression is helpful in that moment. I'm not saying they should be, abusing the Indian players, but it's just that level of competitive aggression that you always need when you're playing sport. And I just thought that was lacking a little bit in the first test from the Aussie side of things.
Even a bit of Mitchell Johnson energy. Someone grow out the handlebar mow and just get things revved up with the stare downs, etc. We need something.
Yeah, you can be nice. You can be a good person, and when you go across the white line, you can get fired up. My biggest example of that, and if you're an A-League fan, I know this is the cricket segment, is Jason Hoffman from the Newcastle Jets. He is the nicest bloke you will ever meet, but as soon as he crossed that white line, you wouldn't want to go up against him.
Yeah, there's a few of those getting around in A-League circles. There's a few in most. Unfortunately, none of us, and it probably sums it up, none of us could name one from the cricket.
Well, I think a really good example was shown to us in the White Ball with Harris Ralph. You hear his interviews, one of the nicest people, one of the most well-spoken, humble, and then you get him on the field and he's just this mean, fast bowler. And who's going to be that person from the Australian attack? And I know at the moment, everyone's gone their own ways and they're going to meet in Adelaide a day early or whatever, but I reckon they just need to get together for a couple of days and just iron out a few of these things, come up with a tactic together. We're still going to be Australia, but at the moment we just need to lift that intensity. You don't have to be, pricks or arseholes. You just need to lift that on-field intensity.
I've got the name for you. It's Michael Neser. Bring him in as the number 7 bowling all-rounder. Push everyone up, bump one out, and bump Marnus out if he doesn't perform, and away we go. I think he's got that competitive grind in him.
That's his Hemi.
Sorry, he'd be good on one leg, mate. He's that sort of guy. Like Ryan Harris. Remember Ryan Harris when he's absolutely busted and he'd still roll out and just trundle down with his knees?
Hit the top of off.
Correct. So, well, we've talked about that. We've talked about the changes to the second test. The last thing before we wrap up the cricket, obviously all eyes head towards Adelaide in the day-night test. The challenge we have is that it will be dire straits if we are 2-0 down because it's a long way back from there. We know that our home state, Ben's probably going to get rain for half the test because that's what Sydney Test cricket does. It's a wonderful annual tradition. So it's going to be tough to come back from 2-0 if we drop this one. But the interesting thing, we've got the Prime Minister's 11 versus the Indians game, and that's what they've been called themselves. I'll just make sure I'm not getting myself in any trouble for anything that could be perceived as miscommunication there. But they're playing up against India. It's not their official test side. They'll be utilising a lot of their squad, Ben. The Australian squad, though, for the Prime Minister's 11, I thought we might have used this to get some more game time in some of our greener batters. We've seen some names there that are familiar with the likes of Scott Boland coming in. Jack Edwards from New South Wales as captain was an interesting choice. Lloyd Pope, a name that's coming out. Matt Renshaw, one that's been around the wings. But I feel there might have been a trick missed here with this squad that we've named.
Well, I'm a bit confused as to why there's no Marcus Harris. Also, who am I thinking of? Hanscom's another one. Hilton Cartwright. All these players who are batting pretty well in the Shield. Henry Hunt's another name. He's not in that side either. So, yeah, I'm a bit confused. Why wouldn't you play the informed players in the Shield who are potentially an option to come in again when you're basically going to be playing against a lot of the Indian Test players? So, yeah, I'm a bit perplexed as to. I know you want to blood young players in this kind of environment, but not at this point, not right now. They need to be giving opportunities to the players that could potentially come into the side, I think.
I think there's a lot of things perplexing about this game, Brody, for me. It feels like it's just filling a gap, which is actually probably helping Indians more than it's helping us, because we're probably going to see, the Jadejas, the Ashwins, these sorts of guys getting some reps of, a lot of their fringe players, and it feels weird to call those two fringe players, but probably speaks to the depth of their squad. We're going to see these guys getting some time. The other thing that I find really bamboozling is it's a 2-day game, which, normally these have been 3 or 4 day games at least. It's an odd one for me in terms of the whole format and what Australia or Cricket Australia are looking to achieve out of this.
Yeah, I've got so many questions of things that have popped up over this last week. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with what you just said there, but also the fact that Scott Boland and Josh Inglis didn't play Shield cricket. To me, it's just mind-blowing. Like, if you do need Josh Inglis to come in for this Adelaide Day night test, get him back, get him some Shield games under his belt. And I think that was so evident, is just the lack of time in the middle for our batters. And there's so many questions coming into this, but no one has spent serious time in the middle. I mean, you look at Steve Smith, look at Marnus. What did they get when they did play? Not very high scores. I think Aussie might have got a 90, but barring him, no one really spent, other than Alex Carey. And look how he's gone. It's probably our most informed batter coming into it. No one spent enough time in the middle. And I think, you think back, the Prime Minister's 11 used to be the next ones coming into the test team, and maybe the ones who you might see in 4 or 5 years' time. Why have we gone away from that?
I agree. I think there's some names even in that squad that, unless you're an ardent Sheffield Shield and local Premier grade cricket fan, you may not even recognise. And I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but for instance, a Jem Ryan, I don't know a lot about Jem, and it's a name that hasn't really spent, we haven't seen a lot of at that level. So there's some interesting choices. I don't know whether Albo's gotten involved or not, but Ben, you talked about being philosophical before. Maybe we might go political. We'll blame Albo if it doesn't go any good, because his name's on the title card.
Well, he gets blamed for everything, doesn't he? So he'd take that on board.
Well, it's certainly going to be an interesting time as we shape up towards Adelaide. Gents, I thank you both for your time. Ben, we'll have you back in a moment to dig into some round ball. Brody, as always, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, gents.
Bye.
Well, we'll move on from the round red ball to the football, the round ball action, and we are joined by 2 guest hosts this week alongside myself. The first is on debut. He is Paramount Plus, Channel 10, and Fox Sports commentator Ben Homer. Ben, mate, great to have you on board. As I said, we're going to have a couple of guest hosts, so we'll bring in our third host for the football segment today. He is our returning star. He's Mr. Consistent, the Round Ball Australia host, Lachie Avil.
G'day, Chris. Good to have a few more faces on today. It's good.
It is great to have a few of us to pick apart the A-League action, and there's plenty to talk about. Let's start with your night round. I'm sure in elements we've all had our eye across it and been at it over the weekend. I'm going to start with you, Ben. Your night round, and I'm calling it hot or not. Where do we judge it in terms of the performance and the success of your night round Mark II?
Well, the first thing is that the main reason for your night round is to stop the grand final being held in Sydney. So I'm going to say that it's a success from that point, because let's be honest, that was a terrible decision, and the ramifications of that are still being felt across the game. So from that end, I'm happy with the way that they handled this in terms of turning it into your night round. In terms of the crowds, I'm sure that's what everyone's going to be talking about. And yes, outside of the Sydney derby, they were pretty disappointing. So that makes things a little bit difficult. In terms of the F3 derby, was it the right decision to put that in your night round? Well, ideally, we would like to host both of those, or those 3 fixtures to be played across, whether two are on the Central Coast or 2 are in Newcastle. We'd like those to be hosted across the 2 home teams, I think. But if you are going to put it in your night round to sort of generate a crowd, I just don't think the Friday night time slot worked that well. I think Sunday Arvo would have been heaps better. Maybe even the Saturday game leading into the derby. But I just didn't think that Friday night, like, let's be honest, people from Newcastle that don't work in Sydney, to want to go down to Sydney on a Friday night, I always think that they're going to be, the only reason they're going to go down is if they're really desperate. Because we know what Sydney traffic's like at the best of times, but especially on a Friday night and especially going south of the Harbour Bridge. So I didn't really like the scheduling of that. In terms of the Sydney Derby, I get why they did that, but I don't know, I sort of feel like maybe they could have played Sydney FC hosting another side and Western Sydney hosting another side, and then you sort of can build crowds around those games instead of just using it up in one game. But overall, the point that I'm making is that, yes, it's not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than Sydney hosting the grand final, which would have been an absolute disaster if that had have happened again. And let's say what happens if it's, Auckland against Wellington, which could well be the case the way they're playing this year in Sydney. Like, let's be honest, it just wouldn't work.
It certainly wouldn't. It would be a real challenge. Lachie, in terms of it, I know that and Ben touched on the crowds. We had 30-odd thousand for the Sydney Derby. There's a double-barrel question here. I'd like to know your thoughts on whether it was a success or not. But what is the actual fair measuring stick of what a good crowd is? I know for the dub that was out at Cogra, the bottom of the seating bowl, which wouldn't have shown up on TV, was reasonably full for a number of the games across the weekend. So I don't know that it was a failure, but when you put it in a 20,000-seat stadium, it doesn't look great. So what's the measuring stick, and was it a success?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. First of all, I agree with Ben completely that purely on the fact that we're doing Unite Round instead of having the grand final in Sydney, just that fact alone, I think makes Unite Round a success. Obviously now we believe we're at the end of that contract. So, the question becomes, do we just want to keep it around? Is it a good event to have? And, the crowds were lower than what we would have hoped for. But I think if you went around and you talked to all those people, and I definitely came away from Unite Round with this impression as well, everyone who was there had a really good time. You get meet a lot of people that you kind of interacted with, seen around the place online. Lots of really passionate football people. And, getting to see, different fans of different clubs walk over and join the supporting, groups for other teams, and that kind of atmosphere was really fun. But, obviously the detractor was just all the other empty seats in the stands. And it's tricky, if you were going to play all the games in one venue, then it had to be Allianz because you're going to want a big one for the Sydney Derby, which I think it did need that marquee slot. And to your point, Ben, about where do you play the F3 Derby, I reckon if you did have the F3 in that afternoon, make it a lot more easy for people to travel down on the Saturday, and then you have the big ticket item of hanging around for the Sydney Derby on Saturday night as well. Maybe that was good, but then again, that just takes away even what crowd there was from the Friday night. So very, very tricky. Where do we go from here? I got no idea. But I think, as I said, everyone who did go had a really good time. So if you can kind of use those experiences and use that as a selling point, maybe it gets a little bit bigger next year. And I guess all we can hope for is that it just keeps growing.
Well, boys, sorry to jump in because my only thought about the only place I think really that could host it is Adelaide. And the reasoning for that is they've got a football-specific stadium. It's about 10 to 12,000. People enjoy going to Adelaide as much as it cops flack. I love Adelaide. It's a fantastic spot. So I think Adelaide would work. I think Melbourne's tough because you've got a 30,000 seater. Sydney, the same thing. Brisbane, Perth, etc. Same issue in New Zealand as well. Adelaide is the most perfect stadium in the country. I think people could get around that, whether Peter Malinauskas and the South Australian government want to fund that as of course they fund Gather Round in the AFL as well. So we don't know. But I think Adelaide, in my opinion, would be the only viable option outside of, say, a regional centre.
Yeah, and on the regional point, if you did fast forward 12 months, if the timeline for the new Tarniert Stadium, is on track, we hope it is. If you maybe had that full stadium, it's built to its full capacity, and then you have Ironbark Fields, which will be the training base, maybe hosting the women's games, you then have two stadiums that are really close to each other, and maybe that offers a good option as well. But that's still a little while away.
Yeah, I think that's the counter or the consideration, right? You need to have a look at, are we going to continue? I think we talked about this the other week, Lachie. Are we going to continue the men's and the women's Unite Round as one in the whole? And I get the concept of Unite Round as bringing it all together. But if we look at the other codes, that's not the way they've designed it. We've seen the NRL, and we touched on this last week, the NRLW, Ben, they're bringing it to Newcastle. So is there an opportunity to do that? Because the other piece that the A-Leagues and the APL keeps talking about is expansion, and it's going to get tougher and tougher to try and get this both men's and women's if we get to, say, 14 teams in both leagues?
Yeah, I think you could host, like, say you went to Adelaide, right? You could, in my opinion, there's a couple of options what you could do. You could host the women's matches either at Cooper's on a different weekend, or there's options in Adelaide as well. They've got Mard and they've got the new South Australian Football Centre that they've got there as well, which is a bit of a smaller capacity, which I think is a great. I've been there. I called an Australia Cup match there a couple of years ago. Really good atmosphere there. Maybe not the seating. I think that'd be the only issue. But I think A-League Women's could do their own separate Unite round at Cooper's Stadium. I think that would work fine, and that way they get to use the facility as the men do as well. So I don't have a massive issue if they split Unite round over the two different competitions. Maybe you could do the Women's Unite round over the international break, because so what was that, last week there was just the A-League Women's playing. So why not sort of build that up, because often people go, oh, international break, what am I going to watch? And some people that maybe only follow the A-League Men's and sort of follow the A-League Women's fleetingly forget about that. And you could do the same thing with the men's Unite round when the women's international break's on, right? You've got the Matildas playing. People are excited about that. Well, here's the men's Unite round. So I just think that's a great way of sort of building interest instead of just putting all the games on one weekend and then your brain just explodes trying to follow them all. So I think that could be an option as well. Like, use the international breaks as a way to generate interest in crowds.
I think that's a great way to focus it in. You could also, depending on, if we look at now the game being played in Queensland for the Matildas, you could work it so that, on the, the Friday or the Saturday, it went on after the last game, if it played at, the equivalent of 9 o'clock.
I didn't really think about this until we just started chatting and started brainstorming. I actually think it's a great idea, because if you can bring your everyday fan in, let's say the Matildas are playing, that's international break, you're playing A-League Men's round, Unite round that weekend, you're bringing an everyday fan in, well, here's the A-League. And maybe you could do that with the Socceroos as well. You could weave that into the A-League Women's Unite round. I don't mind that as a concept, because you're bringing people that maybe might not follow the A-League but are happy to support the national team, that then go, oh, I enjoyed that. I might go and support my local team or something like that.
Yeah, I like it. I think we've got to find ways to get those casual, or as you said, the non-initiated into the football world, and continue to build it up so that they all get the benefit of our wonderful leagues that are growing as we hit the 20th year. Speaking of the A-League Men's in its 20th year, the new side, Auckland, have absolutely set things alight. 4 games played, 4 wins, no goals conceded, 4 clean sheets. Steve Corica, what a change of fortunes it's been for him since he left Sydney FC, Ben.
Well, to be fair to Steve Corica, he was outstanding at Sydney. He took home every piece of silverware, I'm pretty sure, on offer, except maybe the Asian Champions League. They took home the Cup, the Premiership, the Championship. I think I always thought that Steve was unfairly criticised at Sydney. It was like he came in after Arnie and therefore, what he achieved doesn't count. Well, he achieved so much, and I think that's a load of rubbish. And I know it's early days, but he's proving everyone that criticised him at Sydney wrong. Just the way he's built the squad's fantastic. I love the fact that they're ambitious, Auckland. They've got a great side, let's be honest, where a lot of the other sides were cutting costs this year with players because of the cut down in the amount from the broadcast that's being handed on to the clubs. I think that they've just done such an outstanding job, and we could see that in the crowds as well. So, and that defensive unit, you've got Hall and Pinnaker, like you got Sakai right back and De Vries as well. Like it is a strong side, and there's no doubt. Like if you look across the league this year, there is a gulf between your top sides like Auckland and some of those other sides like I'm sorry to say it, Newcastle Jets. Like you think of the money that they've spent compared to the money that's been spent on the Jets. It's a big gulf. And yes, the Mariners proved that, you maybe not need to spend that amount of money, but they still had classy players as well that have since gone on to Europe. So, yeah, I think that this Auckland side, they're going to be right up there. I'd be surprised if they don't make it into the, to the pointy end of the finals.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see. And as you said, they are sitting at the top of the table. They sit alongside their Kiwi compatriots in Wellington. Lachie touched on it before, Ben, and we'll bring him back in a moment. But there's a nice little rivalry building there. We saw the Wellington fans go and join the opposition bay on the weekend. So it feels like it's got some nice rivalry about it, considering it's only 4 weeks old.
I love the Kiwi banter. It's fantastic. Like when you go over to New Zealand, you really get into that. And I just love their sense of humour. We saw that with the banners where the Wellington sign, where it was Ellington, they took the W back to Auckland. I just love that. We saw the crowd at the Cape Tin was fantastic. Can't wait for the next derby. I'm pretty sure it's next month. They're going to Auckland. It's coming up pretty soon. I just think what they've done with Auckland, the expansion, it's been fantastic. I cannot fault. The APL cops a lot of flack, and sometimes fairly, but sometimes unfairly as well. And I think that this expansion, a lot of people were going, not sure about this at the time, but they've been a fantastic addition to the competition.
They certainly have. We've talked about it at length, and I'll bring Lachie back in at this point around the whole fact that they partnered well in terms of it and in terms of looking at Bill Foley and someone who's got an established piece. But Lachie, Auckland and Wellington are the success stories. From last weekend, Western United and Central Coast, they found some form, we'll call it. Have they turned the corner, or do you still need to see more from them?
No, I wouldn't say either of them have turned the corner. I think for different reasons, though. The Central Coast, they're playing a Newcastle side who, I agree with Ben, don't give a lot of hope towards this year. And it's I know you won't be happy with that, but it was one of those games where, Newcastle, the goal that they scored, I thought was the better moment of the match. But then, Caltech gets up with his header and they get one back. And I think for me, it was just one of those results where it's the F3 and they get a win. You could argue some of their earlier games, despite the way they played, they could have won as well. So for me, it's just a result that happens, right? You're going to get wins and losses throughout the season. But also for Western, I don't think they've been as bad in their previous games as their points tally would have suggested. And I think, going down against Perth would have been a little bit of a worry, but the way they came back, a couple of young players really making their mark. Dylan Leonard getting his goal and then getting sent off, a bit of an emotional roller coaster for him. But then Noah Botic with the hat-trick of assists was great as well. So despite, Central Coast having that point lead, I feel much more optimism about where Western United might end up this season.
Yeah, it's hard to really see too much in terms of Central Coast. You said it wasn't convincing against a side that, you've both very aptly described how they're performing, Newcastle. And we saw that with Rob Stanton's comments in the post-match press conference, where he essentially said he doesn't know how much rope he's got left at Newcastle with the change of CEO and different other things that are going on there. So that'll be one to watch. But let's have a look ahead. We've got round 6 coming up this week, an abbreviated round. We've gone to the 3 buys. There's some of these rounds where they're going to have a few more buys. And I guess I'm happy for either of you to jump in here, and we might let the listeners try and memorise that as we jump to the 3 of us on screen. So, Ben, what do you take from what's shaping up in round 6? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say I'm a bit biased, Chris. I'm working on Western United and Victory, so I'm pretty excited about that one. It's always good. That rivalry seems a little more fierce maybe than the City Western United one, even though they both played in a grand final. I just think the crowd that Victory usually take to Amy Park builds that one up. What would be ideal is when Western are able to play that at Ironbark Fields. John Aloisi said, I think next season they're hoping that they're able to do that. I think it was concerns around security or something like that. So that's going to happen in future. This one's going to be at Amy Park. Victory looking to bounce back after the loss to Wellington. Western United, as Lachie said, that was a great win against Perth. I've really enjoyed watching them play this season because obviously JA's had to work with a younger squad, and that's different to his squads in the past. Like you look at his A-League squads at Brisbane and Western United, they've always been sort of older, more experienced players. So this is more of a younger side that he's working with, and I think the signs were really good on the weekend. I think that Ibusuki-Botic combination, I love it. I think they really work well together. We saw that on the weekend, albeit against a Perth Glory defence who, let's be honest, was extremely poor once again. So looking forward to that one. Other ideas around the matches, Perth against Adelaide, that has exclamation mark concerns, big concerns for Perth Glory. God, Adelaide could put on a score if Perth don't get their defence sorted. Jets and Auckland, similar story. Like I like to be positive.
I'm going to jump in there. If we remember at a similar time last year, the Newcastle Jets went over to Wellington. The Newcastle Jets were in a horrible state and banged 3 past them. We know I'm ever the optimist, anyone that listens to this show, anyone that knows me with the Newcastle Jets. But I'm just going to put that out on the table and let you two marinate on that and work out what you want to do with it, and you'll probably just throw it straight back out.
Well, I'm interested to get your thoughts as well, Lachie. Obviously, being a Jets fan, I like to think positively about Newcastle, but that result on Friday really got me down. And I went to the Western Sydney game as well, and that got me down as well. So I'm concerned. I don't think they have the cattle of last year when you had the likes of Piscopo and Stamatolopoulos who could score goals. I'm concerned. And I can tell in Rob's body language, I know he's frustrated. And I've obviously had a lot to do with Rob over the last couple of years. And I'm just sensing frustration, and I'm a bit concerned because usually he's quite calm and, very measured in the way he thinks about the game. But yeah, I'm a bit worried about the Jets at the moment.
Yeah, look, it's very easy to empathise with Rob Stanton and his position. The names you mentioned there, Stamatolopoulos is a massive, massive exclusion for them this season. And with the injury to Lachie Rose as well, they entered the game on the weekend essentially without a recognised striker, right? They had Lockie Bayliss playing up top for the first major portion of the game. So that's going to be really tricky. Yes, you're right, Chris. They were one of the only teams, I think the only team in regular time, if you're counting victory going to extras, to beat Wellington in New Zealand. So that's something they have for them. Maybe the Kiwi trip is where those kind of banana skins come out. But yeah, extremely worried. And, the defence of Auckland, as we were talking about before, just looks so solid that you'd find it hard to think that it could be breached, but you never know. And that game against Macarthur a couple of weeks ago, Eli Adams just turning it on for a couple of minutes. Sometimes you can have those individuals that turn it on in moments, and the Jets do have a couple of those players that just in those little moments can pinch you a goal here and there. So of course you never know, especially in the A-League. It likes to throw a surprise around the corner all the time. But yeah, you definitely have the Black Knights as the firm favourites.
Yeah, I think the challenge.
Hey, Chris, just on that point that Lachie made about Lachie Rose, I think that is a massive loss for the Jets at this stage. They are lacking X factor, and yes, you could say Eli Adams has X factor, Clayton Taylor has X factor, but Clayton seems to be somewhat of a lone ranger at the moment. Eli's been, had that great game against Macarthur, but obviously, he'll get more consistent as he gets more game time and he gets exposed more at this level. We've got to remember he's usually been either not playing or coming off the bench. So I think speed, they need more speed outlets, which is what they had last season with Bahaja and Clayton Taylor, players like that. And if Clayton's the only speed outlet, I think that's an issue. So we need Lachie Rose very, very quickly.
We certainly do. We saw that unpredictable nature, as you said, and that little bit of speed when Ben Gibson got injected the other night. But unfortunately, like Eli Adams, they're both very green. Rob touched on that again in the press conference. So I think, and the Jets fans have been known to put a lot of expectation on a young hope, and, we see how that pans out. But I think, again, Lachie Rose can't get back on the pitch soon enough for the Jets. The other games this week that we haven't touched on, City versus Wanderers, Macarthur versus Brisbane. Is there any stories in these that we need to touch on, or is that pretty much a closeout of the round from the viewpoint of round 6?
I think Melbourne City Wanderers, that is just a massive, you used some grammar in the first game, Adelaide Perth, a big question mark over these two teams. Lots of questions, one matter. His position on the bench or the starting lineup has been a conversation for a few weeks now. Melbourne City have been dealing with a lot of injury troubles of their own? How do they rotate their team around? Nathaniel Atkinson's been playing all over the place. They've got, at least at their last time they played, of course, they had a Bayern Unite round, had like their top 4 strikers out injured, which makes things very difficult, very similar to the Newcastle Jets. So I'm looking forward to that one. I think lots of question marks. But also the reason why we have 3 buys this week, the Mariners and Sydney are playing back-to-back weeks in Asian competition. So the Mariners are not having a good run of form in that competition, and Sydney FC look to be pretty settled into the second spot in their group, but they have to wrap those games up as well. So we know, Chris, we've talked about this a lot. I'm a big fan of the Asian competition. So yeah, looking forward to those as well.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Football.
Chris, just on that City Wanderers game, massive game for Western Sydney, because I've heard, and I think a lot of people that I've spoken to from the broadcast side of things are hearing at Western Sydney things aren't all hunky-dory. I thought Alan Stadgic handled that question around what Fahid Ben Khalfala said about Juan Mata very professionally. I was really impressed with the way he handled that in the press conference the other day, but it wouldn't be easy the way that's all playing out. So really, really big match for Western Sydney, more so than City, in my opinion. And then Macarthur and Brisbane. Just on Brisbane, now Ruben Zadkovic, he doesn't have the best record in the A-League. We know at Perth and Brisbane. But to be fair to Ruben, I know some people are smashing him. I think that Brisbane are a lot better than where they are currently sitting on the table. I think you look at the teams they've played. So they've played Auckland, Sydney, they played Adelaide, and who was the other side Victory. They played? It was a Victory. So they've played 4 gun sides, and in 2 of them, Sydney and Adelaide, they could have won those 2. I think Brisbane could win this week against Macarthur. I think they're a lot better than where they are on the table.
I'm really glad you said that, Ben, because I've been a champion of the Raw for the last month or so coming into the season, and I've been mocked for it relentlessly. So I'm glad I have an ally there.
To be clear, Lachie, you did predict them to finish, was it second?
No, fourth. Okay, just a little bit of context here. Our predictions game is a competition, so I had to have one wild card in there. So I put Brisbane Roar as my horse in the race.
Will they make the finals? I don't think they'll make the finals, but I think they're a lot better than some sides in the competition. Not mentioning any names.
We will see how that pans out. We'll wait for Brisbane to break their duck. And again, as Newcastle Jets people, we've got a bit of a soft spot for Zad. So we'll wait and see how he goes as he continues his coaching journey. But we'll move across to the A-League Women's. And look, Unite round, it was draw central, Ben. 4-1 draw to close out Saturday and Sunday. It was extremely hot, so I can understand there was a bit of lethargy and a lack of energy for a few of the sides. But there's probably a couple of sides that were surprising that they were held to draws by some of the sides they came up against.
Yeah, well, it's been a really interesting start to the season. Obviously, the way Sydney FC have sort of struggled to begin the year. Newcastle, I think that's where I'll start here. I think that this side, are they going to win the grand final, the championship? No, I don't think so, but they could. I'm really happy with what Ryan Campbell's doing. We've got a local coach in charge. We've got a lot of local players in the team, unlike the men's team, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But this is a team that you can tell the city gets around. And why do they get around them? Yes, they are playing good football, but because they are giving local players an opportunity. People in Newcastle feel a connection to them. And honestly, if I went around town and said, which team do you feel more a connection to, the A-League men's team or the A-League women's team, I would say that a lot more people say they have a connection to the A-League women's team. Like you look at that crowd for the semi-final last year that they hosted against Melbourne City. It was absolutely fantastic. I think there was nearly 5,000 fans that went to Maitland Sports Ground that day. So this is a team that I'm really excited about. Sheridan Gallagher coming in. People love her. After coming off the NRLW with the Knights, their defence is a great combination. Chico with Pryor. Like Tash Pryor is one of the best defenders in the competition. It's just unfortunate that she's had those concussion issues. And Bauman as well, international quality player. You got the quality as well in the midfield with Cass Davis. Question mark around goals. I think that's the big question this year with Ayres and Bolden not playing. But that's probably where they're going to have to. That's probably going to be the difference between them being a side that can maybe challenge in the finals or maybe just sneak into the top 6. I think they need to find someone to score their goals. Maybe it's Sheridan.
Maybe it is. She certainly showed it. She's got the power to strike. It was great to see Claudia Chico get her inaugural A-League goal on the weekend. The other team I want to ask you a lot about, Lachie, we just wax lyrical about the potential of Brisbane's men's side. Their women's side are absolutely wowing people. Again, weren't that highly rated by a lot heading into the season. But are they the real deal? Are they a contender for the title?
I mean, they're definitely seen that way, right? I will put the asterisks on this. I was at Allianz Stadium all weekend, so I haven't seen a whole lot of the dub games. But from what I've heard from some of our team members that were out at Cogra is that they do look the real deal. And, having the likes of Tamika Yallop in that team has just set the all-time games played record for the women's side at Brisbane, getting a goal to boot as well. Having a leader like that in your team is very important. And, despite their issues last year, you could see glimpses, right? Like Sean Fry came out of the blocks last year and had an exceptional season. And, having that firepower is really helpful. So when you look down the list of results, you see a lot of 1-1s and then a 4-0. That's got to be a pretty good indication of where you're at.
I think so.
And I think Lachie as well, just on Brisbane, like you look at defence, I always try to really focus on that as the hallmark of which sides are doing really well. Brisbane, 3 goals conceded in their 4 matches. And you look at the back line, you've got Chelsea Blissett, who was, at Melbourne City. Varley was at Melbourne City as well. They come through a good system. McQueen, obviously, great talent. And then Deborah Andela Harp, who I rate highly. She obviously played internationally for Ireland at the World Cup. So she's a great player as well. So I just think with Tamika Yallop as well leading the way for them, maybe it's back to the glory days for the Raw, because we remember in the early days of the then W League, Brisbane Raw were always one of the top sides. They were always up there, and it's been a little bit sort of, surprising that they haven't been sort of that strong side over the last maybe 4 or 5 years. So it's great to see them back up there.
I think the other thing with Brisbane is they're finding that balance between bringing in some really good international flavour as well as bringing through some of the young players. We saw Tamar Levin score an absolute screamer of a goal a couple of weeks ago. Lachie, we had that on the show, that goal, and your reaction to that was pretty solid, I would have thought. But I think they've got a nice balance, as we said, of that local talent, bringing some people back like Yallop. So great to see. And I think it's a really good story that Alex Smith's got going on there. So we'll continue to watch them. But obviously, we head into the international break. The Matildas is the focus in terms of the women's action. And we've got 4 games, and I think there's probably a real dichotomy in these games, Ben. We've got 2 games against Brazil into 2 games against Chinese Taipei. We've seen a couple of players withdrawn from the squad. Mary Fowler, the latest of those. How do you think the Matildas shape up for these games, and how do you think that the focus is going to be in terms of the teams that they roll out versus Brazil versus maybe Chinese Taipei?
Yeah, so I think the Chinese Taipei games finally will give us an opportunity to play a squad that's probably more centred around those A-League women's players. Of course, it's a massive squad. I think it's a 36-player extended squad for these 2 different sort of international windows almost, because the Chinese Taipei, I think, is either just outside the window for the players coming from Europe. And I think that, to be fair to them, it's going to be more beneficial for them just to focus on those matches against Brazil. Brazil, obviously, great side, great opportunity for Tom Samani to sort of build on that window where they knocked off Germany. Like, great result. I know some people were getting maybe a little too excited about it because it is a friendly, and let's be honest, what do friendlies mean at the end of the day? But in terms of the vibe and the feeling around the group, I think that's awesome. The big question, I think, is around the Matildas at the moment is, okay, who's going to be the next head coach? Is if Tom Samani does well in this next window, let's take Chinese Taipei out of it. Well, if he loses to Chinese Taipei, maybe there's a bit of kicking and screaming about that. But if, let's say, they do well against Brazil and the players are happy, do you potentially hire him on a full-time basis? I think this is the big question mark over the Matildas at the moment, because let's be honest, under Tony, They were unhappy, and I heard this during the World Cup. Like, I heard this during the World Cup. I said at the end of the World Cup, I spoke to some people in the camp. I said, what's the vibe? And they were like, it's not good. And I sort of could see this coming, what happened at the Olympics, and obviously it did. And Tony's gone, and I think what I appreciate about Tommy Samani is he gives you a straight answer, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think he's certainly impressed the right people with the way he's approached both, as you said, his straight answers, but even getting his backside on seats at A-League women's games and getting out there. And I understand that the A-League only represents a small portion of what the Matildas now stand for in terms of all these players playing in European and US competitions, but that's something for the Australian fans, and I know it's been a positive sentiment from that, Lachie, the fact that fans have actually seen him out at these games in recent weeks.
Yeah, and it's crucially important to the future of this team as well. Like Samani has talked about this in interviews, the fact that it's likely after a major tournament or two that there might be a bit of a mass exodus in terms of retirements from this current crop of Matildas. So the next generation of players coming up has to be looked after. And of course, we know Tom Samani is very involved at A-League level in his regular job. I believe it's head of women's football at the Wanderers is the role that he's currently on leave from. So he has a good idea of the crop that is out there, but definitely for the next head coach, it's vitally important that they're on the ground in Australia because, you're looking forward to a World Cup cycle that is 4 years long. If you do lose a bunch of those top-end players, and you're going to have to replace them somehow. And as we know, most of our Matildas, come from the A-League. That's where they get their start. So, yeah, absolutely very important. And, speaking to the international window, for me, I'm not putting a whole lot of importance on the way that the Matildas play or even the score lines, as you say, Ben, they're friendly. So what does the result really mean at the end of the day? But, when a new coach comes in, those tactics, those ideas are probably going to change a little bit anyway. So for me, it's just about, seeing how the players connect is, we might not get a great insight of this, but what is it like behind the scenes? Are they, feeling a bit more positive about their football because they've gone through a very intense period the last couple of years with a lot more scrutiny on them than they're used to dealing with. So, we've seen Mary Fowler as taking this window off to just a little bit of a mental health break, I believe was the description. So, things like that are important and hopefully act as a little bit of a reset point so we can move forward with obviously a big tournament coming up with the home Asian Cup.
Well, just on that, Lachie, and I'd love to get both of your thoughts on this. Okay, let's be realistic here. We're not going to win the World Cup. We're not going to win the Olympics as much as we'd love to. Yep, that we dream and love to win both of those. But let's say it's not realistic. What is the issue with potentially taking Tom Samani? All right, you take us through to the Asian Cup. We are a realistic chance of winning this. He's doing such a great job at the moment. Just shoot for that. That would be a massive moment on Australian soil. You could pack out the stadiums. Australia wins that Asian Cup on home soil. That's going to be a monumental moment. And then say, all right, now we're going into the World Cup and Olympic cycles. Let's bring in the new coach and let's build here, because that's the issue from the women's side of things. There's tournaments left, right, and centre. You got the Olympics added to the mix, which you don't obviously have in the men's at the open age level. So I don't mind that as an idea if Tom Samani goes through, takes them through to the Asian Cup and tries to win us that tournament, because we know what a massive moment that would be. We know what happened in 2015. What an iconic moment that was for Australian football.
Silverware on home soil, you've got me certainly on board, Ben.
I wonder, I'm not sure if Tom Samani might specifically be the answer, but I do like the idea of planning the appointment around the Asian Cup, right? Usually in football, men's and women's, we always tend to think in World Cup cycles and that being the end point of a contract usually, and maybe that doesn't have to specifically be the case, but definitely the idea should be for the next coach, whether it's Tom Samani on a permanent base or not, that Asian Cup, that is the goal. We want a team primed and ready to be able to take home the trophy on home soil, which is a very realistic thing to do. Despite how difficult a World Cup can be, the Matildas made the semi-finals, right, on home soil. So we know that gives teams a boost. So we're never going to have a better chance. So as much as we wanted, as I said, maybe a little bit contradictory, develop players for the future, we need to have a squad that is ready to win when that tournament comes to town.
And I think with Tommy Samani, so my reasoning for that, sort of having Tommy at that tournament, is he's a known quantity. We know the players like him because a lot of those older players, he brought them through. Whereas if you bring in a new coach before the Asian Cup, what happens if it all goes boom and then you miss your opportunity to win the Asian Cup on home soil? That's just my thinking, but we'll see what happens.
We will see what happens. There is a big if there, but I like it. Let's plan towards a big tournament on home soil. It all starts 4 games over 10 days from the Matildas, up against Brazil in Brisbane and the Gold Coast, then down to Melbourne and Geelong for Chinese Taipei. A big thank you to both of you for your time tonight. Lachie, Avil from Round Ball Australia, as always, great to have you on board.
Cheers, Chris.
And Ben Homer, thank you for your input and knowledge around the round ball game.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Lachie. Great to chat.
Hello, viewers. Producer JR here. That brings us to the end of episode 007 of the Chris McPherson Show. Thank you to our guest this week, the ever-consistent Lachie Avil from Round Ball Australia, third man up co-host Brody Burrows, and on debut 10 Sport and Fox Sport Australia commentator Ben Homer. Please drop us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week for more sports action.